Let me try that again. No edits. Hello, everybody. Today we have a very fine guest, a very fun guy. He is a producer extraordinaire, multi instrumentalist, flea market connoisseur, healthy eating, vegan, garden growing, new age hippie, and also a good friend of mine, Ben Bishop. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me. Flea market connoisseur. How did you know I just scored a Phantom Menace poster last Saturday?
Is that what you did?
Well, I didn't not do it. Let's put it that way.
Well, don't you usually don't you get a lot of those instruments from like cool markets and
Yeah. Well, my I have a classical guitar that I've had for like 10 years, and I found it at an antique store for $25. And honestly, I don't really want another classical guitar. I mean, I'm sure if you played it, you would think like this is like one of the worst classical guitars I've ever played, but everything else I have is all steel string, and so switching to that nylon string with new strings on it, I'm just like, oh my god, this feels like a $5,000 instrument. But it's just nice to have those options. And yeah, you can. There's so many different antique stores in Nashville and like musical stores or music stores where you can go and find stuff from like the 40s or the 50s or even earlier. Um, and sometimes they're in various shapes. Like sometimes they need repair or they have been repaired. And sometimes I've bought instruments that like sound cool, but they don't stay in tune or they have some issues like that. But if I can get an old instrument that plays well, that stays in tune, that has character to it, like, yeah, I'm definitely going to buy it.
so actually before we start talking going back and talking about the reason why I thought it would be nice to talk to you, how is I haven't even asked you like how is Nashville with all of this stuff? Like I'm sure the the gigs for like someone like Brett have changed dramatically, but for like you, like what is it? Are you guys on like a quarantine
Well,
lockdown or what's going on?
well, I mean, it's not totally locked down and people aren't taking it that seriously. Like most people, there's a lot of people who aren't wearing masks. But as far as the music industry goes, it's pretty much shut down as far as performances and rehearsals and gigs and even like co-writes and stuff too, which is, you can do that remotely, kind of like what we're doing, but it's not the same as being in the room with the other people. And of course, people are doing streaming concerts to kind of keep their income coming in. And I think it helps a little bit, but people are hurting because, anything that brings people together is not allowed basically. So a lot of people make their living by bringing people together with music or otherwise.
Right.
And so it is affecting people that way. But yeah, people are still grocery shopping and like going out into parks and doing their normal thing, but keeping a social distance. And then of course, they're just not going into work. So like downtown is like you've been once or twice,
Yeah,
right?
I was there the one night that we went to downtown. That one strip was just like packed.
Right. So that's always like that. Like in the morning, it's like that. In Saturday nights, it's even more, of course. And I went down the other day to check it out, and there was nothing. There was like, it was creepy too because the all the lights and stuff were still on. Like come on in, and like the cowboy waving and like all the neon lights. If you haven't seen Broadway Nashville,
Yeah.
but there was no sound. There was no one there. It just looked like I don't know, like an episode of like Black Mirror.
Yeah, sure.
Like in that area, it just kind of felt
Yeah.
really strange. Like I could hear my footsteps when I was walking through there for the first time. Like usually it's just so loud. Like there's street musicians, there's like people shouting, but yeah, none of that was happening. Um, I just realized that I need to plug my computer in.
Part of another thing that I notice about Nashville is that like I don't know how this compares to the other major cities, but so much of Nashville seems to be on the production side of things. So you were saying like a writers co-op, like so that's pretty. Could you just talk about that? Like, what is that, and how does that play a role in Nashville?
Like the writing.
Yeah,
Yeah, so like the lifeblood of the song or the Nashville music industry is songwriting, and um, the way that works is people just show up Monday morning at 10, 11 a.m. Usually Monday through Friday, if you're a full-time songwriter, and you just write songs, sometimes 2 a day, and you write with a group of other people. Usually it's about 3. The setup is typically a producer, also called a track guy, which is kind of like a little bit of a derogatory term because that makes it sound like all you can do is like make tracks. Like you don't have any ideas about songwriting or about like final production. You just make a beat, right? So
Hey, I do more than tracks.
right. So if they don't like being called track guys, but and also there are girls, track girls. And so they're kind of producing the session in terms of like working. Okay, so I'll back up. So there's also an artist in the room who you're writing for an album or a single that they're trying to put together. And then there's like a wild card, someone who's just there to like help write the song and like break people out of their normal formulas and their normal boxes.
When you said wild card, I just thought of Charlie from It's Always Sunny, because that episode where he's like, "I'm the wild card."
I was thinking of the Key and Peele episode with G2, like Gremlins 2.
Yes.
The producer comes in to just like mix things up. But that's kind of what it's like, because like, you know how it is. Like if you're working on music, whatever, whether it's performance or composing or writing, like you have your particular way that you view the creative process. And so if you get stuck in a rut, it's kind of nice to have someone come through and be like, let's try something totally different and mix things up. So yeah, there's usually like 2 to 3 people in the room. And over the course of anywhere from 4 hours, 3-4 hours, you can actually get a finished song. And because you have a track guy or a producer in the room, you record the vocals, you do your editing, and if you're fast about it, you'll actually end up bouncing out a final demo the day of. And sometimes, like more often than not, like the producer will go back and like make that demo a little bit better so that when it gets sent to the publishers, the people who are actually going to like get the music where it needs to go, they'll have something that's a little bit more polished and that sounds like the way it should. But it's kind of cool to have like something that you could listen to in your car on the way home.
So you guys are meeting not in, so you're, it's not that you're all doing this freelance for a label. You're all doing this like in, Jason's recording studio. And then if you have something, then what do? You like sign documents to prove that so-and-so had this part of the deal?
It's usually, you want to make sure the people you work with, you have their information on file. Like, if they are signed with a publisher, who their publisher is. But for the most part, until something actually happens, like if a publisher gets involved, they of course need to record everything. So every time a song gets written by one of the publisher's writers, the publisher needs to go through and say, all right, they got to catalog it in their system, and they need to know who wrote the song. Are they with ASCAP? Are they with BMG or BMI? And so they need to have all that information. But the day of the session, it's usually pretty informal. You kind of like, you do all that extra paperwork stuff over email if you need to later on. You send each other your ID numbers for those different organizations so that it can get logged correctly.
I think one of the things that at least myself, and I don't know about the people that'll be viewing this, the 3 people that'll be viewing this.
I'll be more.
Well, it's my mom and my dad.
Okay.
And, I don't know. Me, I'll probably watch it once. I always thought of that scenario that you're talking about happening where all of those are employees of Sony or employees of Interscope or employees of so-and-so. But it seems like a lot of your income, or a lot of your work, and I don't know if this is a Nashville thing or if this is just where the industry is now, is rooted in you all coming up with something and then pitching it to the people who are going to pay the big bucks.
Yes and no. Like, so for me, I'm independent. So like anything that I work on, I have the choice to say, I want it to, a lot of people do pitching to country artists. I don't do that in Nashville anymore. So I'll speak in my world, which is the placement and the sync for TV and film. Since I'm independent, I have the option to send that song to whatever company I think will be able to get that song in the in the right TV show or the commercial, which is really nice. If I have a publishing deal, that doesn't necessarily keep me from doing that, but it makes it harder because there's more parties involved and you have to get everyone to sign on the dotted line.
Mhm.
But in a lot of cases it's mixed. Like it's not going to be all Sony or it's not going to be all like Warner or whatever. It's going to have a mixture of different writers coming together, because if you think about it, especially in what I'm doing, so I'm independent, but I have people that I can pitch the song to, and then one person signed with Cobalt for pitching through Cobalt, and another person signed with Sony. We've basically tripled the likelihood that it's going to land somewhere. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because that's going to be heard by 3 times the amount of people.
Yeah.
But then the downside is, like I said, if you have all those extra entities involved in the rights of the song, sometimes it can be more of a liability, because they all have a stake, not just the writer, but the people who represent the writer have a stake in the song too. So like I said, they all have to sign on the dotted line, which can cause some drama, because, for example, like if the song gets placed somewhere and the money is below a certain threshold, certain companies will just say, no, we're not interested in even getting out of bed for that much money. So we're not going to approve that placement. So they won't turn their key. So there's,
Meanwhile, that could be something that for you,
yeah,
maybe it's not a large amount of money, but maybe
right.
it's enough for you to say, oh, I want to keep barking up this tree.
Yeah, exactly. And then the other thing to that is sometimes sometimes the industry moves really fast, and they're like, we need to place this in 24 hours and we need to get all the rights cleared, and trying to get everyone on board who has a stake in the song in 24 hours is really, really tough. But if you
Especially for musicians who don't get out of bed till 11,
right,
check their phones,
yeah.
and
yeah. Or especially for big corporations, that has to be approved by like 5 or 6 people.
Wow. So this is a good point to back up. Can you just tell, kind of go through your story? How did you get to Nashville? Because I consider you somebody who is kind of on. I know you're doing other things now, but I consider you kind of on like the current wave of music production. I think you made it to the place that you wanted to be, and you did it using modern philosophies and techniques, I guess, compared to like someone who is doing what I did, right? Just like cutting an album, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I have a very traditional old school approach to how I approach recorded music.
Mm-hmm.
But you've kind of been on the cusp with like Fiverr, and then that turned into other things. Could you just talk about how you got to Nashville?
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned Fiverr, because that must have been like, almost a decade ago, where just for fun, I was like, I wonder if I can get on this site and have people pay me to write silly songs for them. And so I signed up with that website, and
Did it work? It worked.
Yeah, you know the story.
I was there. I did some of it.
I know.
Oh, no. I helped you build the website. I didn't do Fiverr.
You helped me with, you helped me with the website. That's right. But yeah, so I think I just had to, I'd never really been paid to do music up to that point. Like it was something I did, usually lost money if you have to pay to play at Webster in Hartford, Connecticut or something. If you remember those shows. So it was never something that I was like, oh, I can actually make some money with music. And then sure enough, $5 showed up in my account one day. And they're like, I need you to write a song about my boyfriend. We've been together for a year. And I was like, oh, that's so sweet. And then so I looked at what what the details of their relationship were, and I worked it into the song and sent them a video with me playing guitar, singing along to it. And it was cute, and it was fun, and they loved it. And so I did a little bit more of that. And then some businesses started to hit me up through that website too. Like, hey, can you write a jingle or write music for this commercial that we're going to have? And I was like, well, yeah, I can, but probably should charge you more than $5 if you're like a business.
So just to add some context, are you still in Connecticut at this point?
Yes. Yeah. Still living in the house I grew up in.
So
Um,
post bachelor's degree,
yeah, post college.
post college, at home writing music. Haven't decided to move to Nashville yet.
Right, right. Yes.
Okay.
Thanks for setting the scene. Yeah. Just previously to that, I'd been, as you know, very interested in guitar and mainly just wanted to be a guitar player. But in bands growing up, we needed to record and someone needed to record. And also, I didn't want to sing, but someone needed to sing. We tried being an instrumental band in high school, but that didn't take us very far.
Pitch
Um,
Access Theory was an instrumental
yeah,
band.
we started instrumental. We had one single that was instrumental.
Which single was that?
It's called Downfall. It was kind of like my I was listening to a lot of In Flames at the time.
Oh,
A lot of Dream Theater.
Oh shoot.
A lot of harmonized guitar parts.
Yeah.
Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
And so I kind of picked up these skills of like singing and songwriting because I wrote some songs with Casey, and started to learn how to actually record the music that we were making. And it was all just out of necessity. And I did more of that work in school too. When I went to UConn, I took some music recording classes. And by the time I got out, I knew a decent amount. I don't think I had the art of it down, but I had some idea of the science. And especially as I did an internship in Hartford as well at a recording studio, I kind of learned more about mixing and more about actually using the equipment, because up until this point I didn't really have the greatest equipment.
Tapeworks was a very traditional
Yeah,
setting, right? They were like, if you said I'm a music producer, I think most people would think of you in that setting.
right, behind a console, behind glass, coaching a band,
Yeah.
which I still do some of, and I have
More
done.
cowbell.
Right, exactly. But that's kind of going away. I mean, in producing bands, it's still necessary, but and I mean, it's still fairly big in Nashville because we have that infrastructure. We actually have the studios, so why not make use of them?
Right.
But I mean, nowadays the gear that's available in a MacBook and a piece of UAD hardware is pretty unreal. It's like unthinkable that we would have had that technology at this point, and it makes it possible for really anybody to get sounds just as good as what they're hearing on the radio. So the thing that holds someone back is, I think, honestly, taste and experience. So it's like, before, in decades past, you could say, well, I would be a famous producer or a successful artist or self-produced artist, but I just don't have this keyboard, or I don't have this console that I need to get the sounds that I want. But now, I mean, there's just an endless supply of amazing plugins and emulations and software out there. And there's plenty of it's for free too. And so I think, I honestly believe, really what holds people back is like their particular drive and their tastes and what they want to use. And now more people than ever are producing, and so everyone has access to these tools. So now it's just sorting out the people who know how to use it correctly.
Yeah, that's really, I mean, if you think about just like GarageBand coming with any Apple product you buy, and GarageBand is, I mean, I'm sure if you do it right, you could use GarageBand on a song that's on the radio, right?
Oh yeah, of course.
Yeah. So let's go back. You're at home, you're on Fiverr, you're making some ice cream money, and then companies start to contact you for songs. Like, what does that look like? What kind of companies? How does that work?
Let's see. I'm trying to remember. There was a medical company, Tycon Medical. I still remember their jingle that I made.
Can you
There was,
sing
I
it,
think
please?
there was. Oh, I'd have to charge you. You can't afford me. And there was another one that was like a Larry Services LLC. That was that was the other jingle I had to write.
These are local Connecticut businesses.
No, these were ones that found me through the website, through Fiverr.
Oh, okay.
Or at this point, I was also I made the website as a way to advertise myself as a for hire songwriter and producer for both artists and companies to do like jingles and things along those lines. And then I was also going on services called Elance. It's now called Upwork, and I was basically bidding on projects that people would say like, "Hey, I need mixing done for this song," or "I need someone to sing vocals or background vocals or whatever it is." Um, yeah, I remember I was actually the first time I was hired to do background vocals was probably like 9 or 10 years ago, and I still work with the same guy today. Now, like I went from doing background vocals to doing like some guitar work on his songs remotely, and then doing full productions and mixing and songwriting for him. So it's kind of cool to have someone who like went through the entire length of my career.
Wow, that's
Um,
awesome. That's awesome.
yeah, but yeah, so it started with the website, thesongmakers.com, and a lot of people around really around the world like came out of the woodwork and would hire me to write. They basically would have lyrics and they would give me lyrics to the songs, and I would put melody to the lyrics and create a track and find the singer, whether it was me or someone else, and make a final MP3 and just would send them
I was really shocked with how many non-business related gigs you had, because when I think of that, I think, you know, this isn't my own judgment, but I'm thinking if I'm a person that doesn't write music, why would I want somebody else to write music? That doesn't make any sense. Why don't I just do what I'm good at, you know? So I was just shocked with how many people that you had that weren't like businesses, like the Dolphin guy. Like that was some incredible, and like the songs were really fun, you know?
yeah, no, and I sometimes think, just for people who don't know, like it was someone who hired me to do basically several songs every week for a couple of years. Like he basically paid my rent for me by hiring me so often, and he would send me lyrics and I would write melodies and produce the songs for him. But you know, it didn't take me anywhere necessarily, and I started doing that after I moved to Nashville to pursue music, and I was kind of sitting there in my apartment working on these, thinking like, I moved to a different part of the country to do something that I could have done, you know, from anywhere really.
Right.
And so I sometimes wonder, it was really great practice, and it challenged me, and I built up all these great skills, but at the same time, like, did it prevent me from immersing myself into the culture of Nashville and meeting people and writing and, you know, getting on that bandwagon sooner? Because it kind of kept me, it was like this like buffer. I was in my bubble. I was like, I don't need to go out and make money in Nashville. I could just let the money come to me through these people online. So it was kind of a blessing, and I don't want to say a curse, but like it was kind of a mixed blessing, because it was something that, you know, let me be successful right away and like full time, like making, you know, a good living producing music for people. But at the same time, it was like, it wasn't taking me anywhere. It wasn't like introducing me to new people and elevating my career. But I don't think I would trade it, because I think I needed a lot of practice, like with the songwriting aspect, because I was like trying to match melodies to lyrics, and then figuring out arrangements, how to arrange in these different styles, because I would always be sent different reference tracks to try to match. So it was definitely a huge learning process.
What so how long did you spend doing this Fiverr freelance stuff before you decided that you wanted to move to another place? I remember it being like, I want to say 2 years. Is that right?
Mm,
Was it longer than that?
it wouldn't have been longer than that. It would have been about, let's see, I graduated in 2009, and I had my internship right after that, for, um, it would have been about a year.
Okay.
I think I
So
was,
the reason I'm asking is that you went from very limited experience to pretty experienced. Then you go from being sort of like the, I don't want to say the big fish in the small pond, but you went from a place that was where you were starting to see where the limits were, and then you jumped in to a whole new setting. So why did you choose Nashville? Because I'm thinking about, you know, musicians that want to make it, right? And so they go to, or like comedians that want to make it, they go to like New York or LA or Chicago, where there's a lot of performance. But what you're looking for, or what you were looking for at the time, was less about performance and more about creating. Why did Nashville jump out at you?
Well, it's because of our mutual friend Casey. Like he was a friend that encouraged me to come to Nashville, and I'd been following his career. He was a couple years ahead of me. He'd moved down for college. I didn't, and he was basically at the time doing similar things to what I wanted to do. He was working with artists and writing and doing a little bit of producing, I think, too. And I was thinking like he was the only person that I knew personally that was doing something similar to what I wanted to do. And so he was saying, "Hey dude, if you want to do it, you should come to Nashville." So it was as simple as that, really. And I had looked at other places. I went out to California for a little bit. I don't think I really gave LA a full look over that I should have in terms of like weighing the choices. I think my heart was set on Nashville. I just wanted to check out some different options just in case.
Casey is no joke.
Yeah.
Right? He's no joke. What was the name of the song that was number one?
Yours by Russell Dickerson.
So he wrote that.
Yeah, like the same thing I said, that he did a co-writing session with some other writers and they made a demo, and I think they basically, in the way it works in Nashville, especially for people who are undiscovered at the time or lesser known, you create these songs, like I said, you make a demo at the end of writing a song, but really what you do is if you believe in this music, you create it and you put your heart and soul and like lots of time to make basically something that sounds like a radio single. And you might have to sit on it for a year or 2 years. I don't know exactly how long they waited, but you have to just believe in the song so much and get it to a point where if a publisher hears it or someone from a label or an artist hears it, in that case, I think it was written with the artist, but you want to get to the song to a point that when someone hears it, who's critical, they're going to hear it right away. It's like, that sounds like a hit. It's not like, oh, that sounds like a hit, but the chorus doesn't hit hard enough, or the vocals are kind of out of tune, whatever it is. You want them to hear it as it will sound when it goes out to the masses, so that they don't have to like imagine anything to make the choice.
So when you moved to Nashville, didn't things start fizzling out with Fiverr and you started getting more like high caliber, real life producing gigs?
I was starting to get my feet wet a little bit, reaching out, and I got some weird gigs, and worked with some very interesting people that I didn't need to be working with. And so that probably wasn't the best first experience reaching out and trying to, I mean, the community in Nashville was great, but as soon as I started to like advertise myself as like a producer for hire, I got some strange, some calls and some of the strangest voices I've ever heard. Let's put it that way.
Let's hear one of them. Voice. I don't want to hear any of the other contextual pieces. Just do a voice.
Do you want to play it or do you want me to impersonate it?
Oh, you have the voice on recording?
I might.
Let's see what you got.
If not, I will feel bad.
Oh, so these are things that you recorded. I was thinking like songwriter stuff where.
Oh, well, things that were, I was hired on as a producer for hire. I might not have actually saved them.
Why don't you just give me, why don't you just order a Big Mac and a Coke in that voice?
Well, thankfully for you, I actually found it.
Okay, here we go.
Can you hear it?
Yeah. Okay.
All right.
Okay, I think that's all we needed.
Anyway, to basically what was happening was like I was kind of striking out. Like online work was doing great, and I could have continued that. I felt the need to get out of that cycle because like I was saying, I wasn't really elevating my career. I was just kind of working with the same people that, you know, weren't connected into the industry at all. They were just hobbyists, songwriters, hoping that they strike it big. And so I reached out, kind of struck out a couple times, and then out of the blue, I get a message in my email from a website that I signed up for. And it was basically like a networking website for musicians, and it was localized. So you put down your city, so people in your city could say, hey, you play this instrument, you want to play with my band, or you produce or you songwrite, do you want to work with me? It was basically like a networking tool for musicians. And someone reached out and they said they're not in Nashville yet, they're moving, and they like what they heard and they want to work with me as a producer. And so I was working with them just as like a producer for hire for a couple songs. And I was like, oh, this person's pretty good. Like she's got a nice voice. She writes some really interesting songs. But I mean, I didn't necessarily think anything of it because up until that point, I was just working with people who were usually much older and doing this on the side for fun. But this was someone who moved to Nashville, kind of like me, to pursue songwriting and actually had a lot of talent. So I was working with her, but what the real game changer was when this was such a pivotal point in like my entire experience in Nashville. But at the time it just seemed like, oh, this is just something that's happening. But if I only knew. She did a workshop she was involved in a workshop for ASCAP, which is a songwriter performance royalty organization in Nashville. And she got into this workshop and met like a bunch of other really talented, young, hungry, really well-connected songwriters and singers. And they were all looking for someone to make demos. So she was like, hey guys, I know someone who can record us and make demos. Wow. So one by one, she would like bring them over, and some of them would write songs, like a bunch of them together, and they would all come over and record. And sometimes it was just one person, two people. And for 6 months, a year, I was the guy the only person that they recorded with. And some of these people were just, you have to understand, like I played that clip so you could understand, like I was working with people who couldn't sing. And all of a sudden I was working with like some of the best singers that I've ever worked with. And some of them are some of my favorite singers out there. And so that was such a special time for me. But what really happened was, some of those people over the course of the next few years, they ended up moving away or not doing music anymore. And some of them continued on and are having really, really successful careers, being signed with Universal, for example. Like these people are extremely talented. I was just lucky enough to be there to record with them. But through that process, they started asking, hey, do you write, Ben? And like, do you want to work with us as a songwriter? So then we all just started to write together. Because unfortunately, what I was feeling, at least, was as a for hire producer, there was always this barrier. Like here was a big group of friends that were writing together, hanging out together, like collaborating. And then there was me, who they had to pay. And so I always felt like, the person who was like a little bit of an outsider of the group, and I wasn't invited to write with them for a while, but then that started to happen. And so I started to actually write with some of these people. And then through that, I started to meet their publishers and the people at ASCAP that they work with. And I started taking meetings. And, it's the way most industries work. Like, you get introduced to one person who then introduces you to someone else. And pretty much 100% of all of my success in the music industry, I can attribute to that one message on my email that I could have just as easily like deleted and been like, oh yeah, I don't want to bother with this random person online.
Wow, that's awesome. Was she the woman that you were in a band with, her and her husband? Is that right?
No, that was actually a different group
because I know that woman had moved to Nashville too.
Yeah, that was a totally different branch of what I was working on. That was I was hired on as a guitar player because I was still taking gigs as a session player and as a for hire guitar player around town. And that turned from like being a hired guitar player to, hey, do you want to join our bands and be a trio? Because it was a duo at the time. So I came on, and then the guy who moved with her as part of the band moved back to Oklahoma.
Uh-oh.
So she was like, hey, Ben, do you want to step up and be the other like lead member of this band. And I don't really know exactly why I said yes. Like I was enjoying it at the time, and it was I liked being behind the scenes though. Like as soon as I realized like, oh, if you're in a duo, you actually have to like, engage with fans and take on an identity and a story. And I realized like I'm not a country artist. Why am I in a country duo? So I had to put a stop to that. But I wrote a lot of really great songs, and that project interfaced with the group of writers I was talking about before, and she was a great friend, and I worked on a lot of fun music. But at a certain point, I realized too that country music wasn't really my forte. I realized like I wasn't really listening. Yeah, right. I mean, but it took me, at that point it was 5-6 years, maybe closer to 6 years, to realize that maybe I don't need to be doing country music anymore, which led to the next step.
Which is Mayfly.
Well, no, Mayfly happened like early. Mayfly, I released my solo album as soon as I got to town. I started writing. That was mostly by myself, and I went to the studio, recorded.
The reason that I thought that it came next was because stylistically, that has nothing to do with the country stuff that you were playing. Because I remember I saw you. What was the name of that band that you were in with the duo when you were?
Oh, November Lily.
November Lily.
Yeah.
I remember being in that cafe and watching you play. The only thing I remember was that the cheese was really good. They had some really good cheese.
I wonder where that could have been.
It was. I could picture it as I can't tell you anything about. It was near the They have a little Pantheon, right? Like
Parthenon. Yeah.
Oh, Parthenon. My bad. It was around there, and it was. I could see it in my head. It was like a hotel.
Was it a small place? Oh no, Hotel Indigo maybe.
Maybe, but the cheese was good.
Okay.
And so Mayfly is your only album under Ben Bishop,
right?
And that is more of your Owl City phase. That's reducing it to such. That's not.
Yeah. No, there's definitely some influence there.
It's like pop electronic instead of like country singer songwriter.
I'd say it's a blend of all those because predominantly it's mostly acoustic guitar driven and like really melodically driven vocally. But there are electronic elements in there too. But the way it's mixed and arranged is kind of similar to bands like Owl City and some of the composition. But the sounds themselves, I tried to keep it. The whole idea with that album was like to mix the like organic sounds with the electronic sounds in a way that sounded cohesive.
An area of contention for you and I when we were writing music together. I don't want to talk about that part, but I'm sorry for my anger. Well, let's not. I think we've moved past it. And this is something that I couldn't appreciate about you until we weren't writing music together anymore. And I actually heard about other artists like Rivers Cuomo from Weezer adopting this similar idea, is that, and I don't mean this in a patronizing way, but the idea is I want to write the perfect pop song. And I'm not sure if that fits with you. That's something that he said. But when I think about your songwriting, I think about like you have a structure in your head, at least with some of the stuff that we were talking about and with the stuff on your first album. You're like, if we're going to do this, then these are the appropriate next steps. And those steps fit into the pop realm really well.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was something that I couldn't appreciate about you when we wrote like Clouds, or when we did
Clouds Tonight.
I still listen to our I really think that the place, what was that in New Haven?
Oh yeah, the live show.
Yeah. I think we did a really good job. I still have it on my
I'd like to hear it. We recorded Clouds Tonight too. I don't know where that went.
I think I have the original on my my Google Music
drive.
That
would be great to hear.
I'll give it to you. Everything, I think that your point was like, you know, we have chosen to make, if we're talking about food, we have chosen to make this dish.
Yeah.
If we're going to make this, if we're going to make pasta, then here's the list of things we can do with the pasta.
Right.
Where I was like, I want to be Dream Theater. So let's just throw a wrench in the whole thing,
Right.
which is a very, which for me, I had to find that I didn't want to do that. Instead, I wanted to play other people's music and look at it in terms of like their art that's coming through me. And that fits with me a lot better than trying to write music. But for your stuff, and the reason that I brought up Owl City is that everything is so polished and perfect and it makes sense within that genre.
And I think it has a lot to do with what you're listening to at the time and what you're really enjoying. Like at that point, you know, I mean, we had shared Dream Theater and Opeth and some of these progressive bands that we took influence from, but I kind of branched off. You branched off, and I started listening to Jason Mraz, and then also some artists from Nashville like Ben Rector, um, and that was what I was hearing. And you weren't listening to that music; you were listening to different music. And so when we were trying to write a song together, I was playing by one set of rules and you were playing by a different set of rules. And I think
Yeah.
um, that's what made us probably bash heads a little bit.
And I don't think either one of us could diagnose the problem, right? Like nobody was like,
Yeah, we didn't have perspective.
yeah, yeah. But getting away from that, so could we just talk about Mayfly for a little bit? So Mayfly was when I look you up on Spotify. Obviously, I want to talk about Obeds, uh,
Yeah.
but but Mayfly is your record, and how do you feel about that? So that was released in, is it 2013? Is that correct?
That's right.
So
Yeah,
what's your perspective now on a record like that?
I'm really proud of it, and really happy I put it out. I think a lot of people, especially people who can produce themselves, put their own projects in the back burner and work on everyone else's. But thankfully, I didn't really have that many projects I was doing outside of like the for hire work online. So, you know, it was something that I could really focus in on and pour a lot into. And it was at a time in my life where, you know, everything was new. Like after fantasizing about moving to Nashville for probably upwards of 5 years, I finally made it. And I was so excited. And it was just, I was absorbing all sorts of new influences and I was writing a ton. And I just wanted to put something out there because I was so inspired and I had these songs and I didn't want to just sit on them. Uh, and I'm really glad that I did. It would have been easy. Like me personally, I have had trouble finishing projects that I start. And so sometimes I can get things to earlier in my career, I would get things to like 80%, 90%, and then never finish them because I wanted them to be perfect. And it's like, no, they're not ready yet. But I think with that album, I definitely slaved away a lot, put a lot of time into it. But at a certain point, I was like, it's done. I'm going to put it out there. And I'm glad I did because, you know, if I went the other direction and just said, oh, I'll finish it later, I'll work on it next month or, you know, a year from now, it probably would never have gotten released. So I'm really happy that that's out there and that it's a little moment, a little snapshot of my life in that time. And I encourage more artists and producers to just release music because I work with a lot of people that are like tentative about it and they're like, well, this is my first single, so I want to make sure it counts. So they just don't put out a record or
Yeah.
they just become too much of a perfectionist. But yeah, that was just a summation of all the people that I was listening to and the new inspiration of being in a new city uh, and on a new path in life.
It was funny you mentioned the snapshot thing before I recorded the classical guitar album. I was talking with Andy York, and we were out to dinner after. Andy York is one of the LAGQ, Los Angeles Guitar Quartet. He was one of the members for a very long time, and he's just a monster classical guitar player. I'm sure you've heard his stuff. Like if I put on Snowflight or Sunburst, I'm sure you've heard those. And we were out to dinner after a master class, and I said, you know, I just want this to be a representation of who I am as a player right now. This is before I recorded it. And he was like, well, of course it's going to be that. It's
Mhm.
going to do that automatically.
Yeah.
So it's almost like you don't really have to try. All you have to do is go show the world what you've been working on.
Right.
You don't have to go and try to do something as long as you're honest. Like if that's what you, if you're proud of something and you make it, then that's who you are in that moment. That might not be who you are in 10 moments from
Yeah.
now or 20 moments from now, but that's that.
Yeah, I
So
think
how did
I, th- I think that that's kind of. I wonder if there's a parallel to what you said, because I would imagine the music that you are prepared to record might not be what you're learning at the moment. Like if you've already learned that sonata and you've got it down perfectly, but you might be excited about a new piece that you're learning. I don't know if that's the case. Maybe all you do
yeah,
is focus
definitely.
on that. All you do is focus on that one piece that you're trying to record. But with songwriting and production and releasing music, a lot of people are like, it takes so long to get put out that by that point you've already started writing new songs. And you're like, well, that maybe I won't release that because that's like a older version of me, but you still should release it.
Well, there's two things. One thing is that if you look at some of these really older these guitar players that have been around for a long time, and I'm sure this exists in other branches of music, but if you look at someone like Oscar Giglia, who is like my hero of classical guitar, he has a record from like when he's in his 20s, and he plays this piece that I'm working on, this homage to Debussy, and he plays it one way. I think it's the homage to Debussy. Now I'm second guessing myself. It might be the Prelude, Fugue, and Allegro, because both are on that album, I think. But he plays it one way in his 20s, and then he just released an album of it. It's definitely the Prelude, Fugue, and Allegro. My bad. It's not Defia. It's Bach. Of course, it's always Bach. And then he records this album like 5 years ago, which was like a reference album that I gave you when you were mixing my album.
Oh yeah.
And it sounds like two different universes that this piece exists in.
Wow.
So, and obviously it makes sense. I mean, the guy had like 60 years of experience between those two recordings or whatever it is, but it's you grow and you mature, and whatever you release at that time is who you are at that time, and as long as you're comfortable with that.
Yeah, and it's something you're going to cherish.
Oh, absolutely. For me, the thing about being excited about the next piece was I was so in those pieces when I recorded them. And then as soon as I was like, those are the takes, I had been playing that program for 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
So I stopped playing that program. So by the time it was released and I listened to it, I was like, oh yeah, that's how that goes.
Right.
Because I just hadn't played it for so long.
Oh, sure.
So let's move. We've covered a lot, but before we wind down, can you talk about your transition from doing these gigs and writing the singer-songwriter music to your most recent publication project? I mean, there's so many things that you've done in between. I really want to talk. Well, maybe we'll get a chance to talk about like the Riverdale stuff and all of these things where you've worked as a writer and gotten your music to these great places. But then also the Obeds project is so cool because you are working more like, and forgive my ignorance, like a Zed would, where you're like, I'm going to do this. You're the performer. You do that. And every track on that album is a different, could be in its own album.
Right. Well, yeah, that's with that record. It was never like, okay, I'm going to create a project. I'm going to create Obed's project. And I'm going to get all these different singers together and we're going to write songs. I'm going to put them together and I'm going to release them as an album. That's what I did to that's what the public sees. The public sees, oh, Ben got a bunch of people together, but behind the scenes, like in many creative industries, like it's what's public facing doesn't necessarily mean that's what's happening behind the scenes. So what actually happened was I was, through one of the people that I met through those contacts that I talked about earlier, some people were working outside of the country world and they were trying to develop a pop industry in Nashville because there's talent here. There's people who, as you can hear, like have amazing voices for that sound, but there wasn't a lot of industry support for pop music. So basically what was happening was there's a chopper that's flying like directly over my house right now. The whole place is shaking. It's East Nashville.
Cue Mark's sound effects.
Yeah, right. So what was happening, people were, I was getting set up on these dates, these sessions with people I've never met before. I quickly check out their Instagram and then they knock on my door and they walk in. And then the third person shows up because like I said, usually there's 3 people. And we talk about what's going on in our life and we listen to music that we played little bits of music that we're really enjoying, but it was pretty much all, it was nothing like what I was working on before. It was no country. It was all pop music. And so that was so refreshing because finally at that point I wasn't listening to country music anymore and I didn't really enjoy it. So I was like, okay, wow, I'm surrounded by people who actually want to make the music that I want to make. This is great. But the entire time I was doing that, I was doing that for a full year. I was thinking, oh, this is going to be great. We're going to write a song and then I'm going to produce it for their single. And then maybe they'll hire me to produce their record or produce their next single. And I'll make a career as a producer for hire. And it was always a means to do that, to like build up my reputation as a ghost producer producing for other artists. But what was happening was like people were, like I said, were kind of timid about releasing, and there weren't a lot of releases that year by the people that I was working with. So at the end of the year, I was looking back and I was like, my God, there's some songs that turned out really, really nice. And some of those people were starting to write new directions and have a different sound. And I was like, wait a minute, all these, if they're not going to put them out, all these songs have a little bit of a common thread. Like you said, there's a lot of differences because the singers on each track are different, but I feel like my production's pretty consistent throughout. So why not get them out to the public? And I'm technically a songwriter. I helped write a lot of those songs. And I own part of the master too, because I wrote or I produced the track. So why don't we go in and collaborate and release this as a collaborative album with, I think there were 13 different writers involved and 7 different singers. And it was a really good call because it's another record that I'm really proud of. And I think I have background vocals on maybe one song, but pretty much everything else is other people's voices. So it's fun to like not be singing at all in it.
And
but yeah, very different than Fly.
It's such a different type of thing because, like you were saying, sort of when we first started talking, that nobody wanted to sing, so you said, "Okay, I'll do it." Nobody wanted to. Nobody could sing in the bands you were in. Nobody could record them, so you had to step up to do that.
Yep.
So when you're the singer, you have to write things around you. So I would imagine there's a certain sense of freedom when you have somebody where you can just say, "Can you do this?" and then they do it, and then you just sort of get to build the world around them. Mm-hmm. Instead of having to look inside and build a whole, because then you get stuff like, I mean, Jason Mraz is great, but Mr. A to Z, all the tracks sound like they're from the same album, and that's a good thing.
Right.
But the cool thing that you can get away from is that you can say, well, I'm going to build this around this person's personality. I'm going to build it around this person's personality. So when you have however many tracks are on that album, you get to be a little more creative and a little less, this is me again. This is me. This is me sad. This is me happy. This is me contemplative.
Yeah, and then each song is going to be so different because different people worked on the melodies, different people worked on the lyrics, and different people sang them. So there's going to be a different texture to work on. And a lot of those ones when we finished the session didn't sound anything like what the final product sounded like. It was usually just like a loop that was just maybe 1 or 2 instruments. And then the vocals. And then, so like you said, I built the world around the vocals once they were recorded. And it was also just fun to like work with over that course of that year. There was just probably over 100 different people that I had sessions with. And it was just great to learn about people in general. Cause like, if you work with the same people over and over again, you kind of forget that there's other people out there that are really, really talented in this area, or maybe need a lot of help in other areas. Like I was always, lyrics were something that I could come up with in little bits, but like it was always something I had to really work on to come up with really great lyrics. And I've worked with some people who just can't not just spit out great lyrics. Like as soon as I start playing a track or beat, they'll just start coming up with amazing lines. And sometimes they sing them with great melodies too. And then they're like, wait, turn the microphone on. And then we record the verse and the verse is done. And so understanding that there's so many different ways to record, like I was getting stuck in my head, like thinking that this was like we were talking about formulas, that there's this one way to get from point A to point B. But working with that many people for a project like that, like I learned so many new tricks and learned a lot about myself, that what I can offer different people. Because some people, they write lyrics amazing and they have an incredible voice, but they can't hear when maybe their voice is on one note is like a little bit under, and they don't hear it. And I'm like, oh, just sing that like note like a half step higher, and that'd be perfect. And like, because it's not even in the key of the song, and they're singing it. And I'm like, and they don't understand that. So I'm like, hey, do you hear that note? And they're like, what note?
I
So
was
there's
superimposing a chord.
right, right. Well, no,
I like the Clash.
right. Like some people were doing that on purpose, but I guess my point is that like you might think that you might assume that, oh, these people are so talented, they can't possibly need anything I could offer them because they have the lyrics, they've got the voice, they've got a vision for what they want the song to sound like. I mean, what can I offer here besides maybe adding some cool track stuff? But as a producer, I'm always thinking like, hey, why don't you sing that a little bit differently? It's like sing that with a little bit more breathiness or more power. And then it's putting them in a place that they've never been before. And that's what I always try to do in vocal sessions. So it was just fun to like work with that many different people and like understand how people's minds work. And yeah, it was a special time.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So there's a couple things really quick that I want to touch. I had heard from you just throughout the course of texting each other every now and then or talking on the phone. You'd be like, oh, yeah, I'm writing music for the Voice app, or oh, I have a song on Riverdale. So, what are some like really cool, like maybe you could tell me a story about, I don't want to say like a claim to fame, but like something really cool that you were unexpecting that it got so far, or or just a story like that.
Yeah. Well, so when I moved to Nashville, there was a TV show called Nashville, and it started around the same time that I moved to town, and they would film at the Bluebird, or at least a set that looked like the Bluebird Cafe, which is a venue, and that was like right down the street from me. And I was like, oh, this is so cool that like here's a show about people who are living out their dream, doing music. It sort of turned into a soap opera, as all TV dramas do. But it was like set in Nashville, and people I knew were in the show too, like as extras sometimes. And I would listen to the music, and the music was always really great, even like the full feature songs, or sometimes even just the background music of like the drums and guitar, just moving the scene along. And I was always thinking that would be so cool to get music that was on a show like that, to like be integrated into the city in that way and be accepted, would be really awesome to contribute that. And I kind of forgot about that for a long time. And then a friend of mine who I met through that girl who went to that workshop and introduced me to all those people, like I was saying, he was a signed writer at a publishing company, and they do these things called writing camps. And writing camp is when you get together with a bunch of other writers, and over the course of a weekend, you'll work on songs for one particular opportunity. So the opportunity that one was writing for that Nashville show. So it was writing songs that would get used as support music and production music for that show. So he did that, and then he called me up one day and he said, hey, we made this demo at this writing camp, and they actually really like the song and they want to use it, but we need to make really good recordings. Do you want to produce the song? And at that point, it was like kind of sure that it was going to be a shoe-in to the show. And I was like, yes, I absolutely do. So we came over and we recorded all the parts, and we did a couple songs actually. They were going to choose one. And sure enough, I got the call when I was out in, I think, Utah. I was overlooking the Horseshoe Bend Canyon out there, if anyone's ever been there. And I got that phone call that they were going to use it and they were going to put it on the show. And I was happy for days after that. And it's definitely one of those things. It's like something you put on your goal list of like a dream goal. Like, I would love to get music on that TV show. And then sure enough, without you even really trying, like an opportunity sometimes can just fall in your lap. But of course, it's not that I just lucked into it. I put myself in that position and I knew the people who were connected, and I had the skills to really deliver on that. So that was probably one of the more special placements that I've had.
That's great.
Yeah.
The big thing that I hear from that is not only do you have to like network, but you have to know when it's like this really conscious networking, right? So you know, you can be a social butterfly and you can meet all these people, but it sounds like you had to learn pretty quickly what roads not to follow, because you know, it seemed like you were like, okay, I'm not going to work with these people because I don't think anything is going to happen. And I kind of imagine that once you crack into something, all these opportunities start popping up. But it feels like you had an intuition about who to spend your time with and who not to spend your time with.
Yeah, I mean, or just working on music that you're excited about and that makes you feel something. Like if you're working with people who like you're not excited about the music, you're kind of just going through the paces and you're like, why am I doing this? Like most people choose to do music as a career because it's something that they love and it's their passion. And if you know, if too many days go by where you're not like excited to do the music that you're working on, then something's wrong, I think. I mean, of course, you know, not every project is going to be the most amazing thing you've ever done, but you know, you have to be enjoying it because there's, you know, there's a lot of sacrifice involved in working in the music industry. So yeah, I definitely had to put myself in the position because, you know, a lot of people are afraid to say no and to lose clients or lose friendships or whatever it is. But if that's the right call, it's the right call. And it might seem like you're losing opportunities, but really you're opening up yourself to new opportunities to come. And but the thing about it, like all those little turning points that I've had, more often than not, they weren't things that I was really pressuring myself to do, like, or really pushing on. Sometimes it was things that just came to me, but at the same time, like I look back at the conditions that I created to let those things actually happen. And so there was some intention there. It wasn't just something that I completely lucked into. Um, but I think that goes to show that you should stay open to things that you don't expect and not to be so tunnel vision and thinking like this is my only route to success, because you might be thinking this way and something blindsides you and falls in your lap and you have to be able to make a right angle turn and just go with it. If it's
Yeah.
the right call.
What would you say to somebody that was, you know, is today where you were 10 years ago and is thinking, I want to get into the behind the scenes, more of the behind the scenes music stuff? Maybe it's production, but it's probably not the studio behind the glass behind a console. What would you say to them to help get them out there, to help educate them on their technique? Because what we haven't talked about this whole time is that you kind of had to teach yourself a lot of this stuff, right?
Yeah.
Because if you didn't, were you majoring in music?
No, I took some music technology classes, which were good foundations, uh, and then also I learned a little bit at the studio that I was interning at, but not as much as you'd think. There was a lot of voiceover work, which is still useful because you learn about vocal production and you learn about signal chain and things like that. But it was nothing compared to what I learned just getting to work on it every day, work on music
Yeah.
every single day, and really like there's so much information out there on YouTube, and you know, groups on Facebook, or you know, people that you can network with and ask questions, like in Reddit. It's full of information. So I feel like there's no lack of that now. But yeah, when I started, for the most part, it was all self-taught.
And what would you say to somebody who wants to change their
Oh,
geography in order to
right.
get to?
Well, so to leave out that whole aspect of honing your craft, which is of course is really important, but I mean, we could talk about that for, you know, hours, and there's all sorts of things. And like I said, there's plenty of resources for that out there. I'd say don't underestimate people and collaborating and having a team, because you know, you can be the most amazing person in the world at what you do, and there's a philosophy that says like, you know, be so good that they can't ignore you, which is, you know, shouldn't be misinterpreted to say that I'm just going to work really really hard at making amazing music and let them come to me. Like, you still have to put yourself out there and you still have to try to work with people who have skills that you don't have. Like, so for example, if you make beats or you're just a producer, like you probably should start teaming up with artists that have followings and or have connections. And like a lot of the placements that I've had or cuts that I've had haven't come through me taking the song and doing something with it. It's come from the fact that other people are involved. If I was doing it all myself, I wouldn't have a team to pitch it to. So I feel like people should be more open to working with other people. And that doesn't have to mean that if you're one of those people who works best in your basement, just, you know, messing around with sounds and you don't want another person in the middle of your creative process, that's fine. But at some point you have to let someone else in, because it's just so valuable to let other people come into your, not your creative process, but the part that you aren't good at, maybe the business side or the pitching side.
Especially in a business,
yeah,
where so much of it is like contingent on getting the right exposure. I mean, there's plenty of people that have really good exposure and are very successful, but their art is not good.
right.
Right. So it's like the more you be doing yourself a disservice if you're not trying to get around as many people as possible, people that are going to lift you up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's absolutely true. And I also think if I were to try to be a producer or especially electronic music producer now, the first thing I would do is make a lot of like remixes and using lots of really interesting samples and remixing popular songs. Because there's friends of mine and doing covers and things along those lines, because there are friends of mine who they write original music, but they gain their following of sometimes millions of people by making a lot of great covers or remixing really popular songs. So because people are more likely to click on it if it's something that they've heard of, as opposed to if you're a complete nobody. And then you could start to transition into, you know, letting people know that you actually make original music. So I think that's a really good tip. I had a friend today who told me he's thinking of, he does top lining, which means like basically like singing on top of other people's tracks.
I was
He's
going
like,
to guess that.
he was saying what people should do is remix the Tiger King guys' songs into their beats, or writing a song about the Tiger King, and strike while the iron's hot, because everyone's talking about that too. So I mean, it's super topical, and maybe that's not your thing. If it's not your thing, it's not your thing, but
Right.
probably would get a lot of people to click on your music. Get creative.
His music was cool. He didn't. That's not his voice though.
I think it was.
No, there's Joel McHale interviewed.
Oh.
They added another episode to the series on Netflix.
I don't think I saw that.
And it's a follow-up interview, and one of the guys is like, "No, that's not his voice." Because I was like, "Oh, he's a terrible person, but at least he can. At least that's a nice country voice."
Right. So yeah, you wouldn't have to pay the Tiger King. You'd have to pay whoever sang on that.
That feels a little more ethical.
Actually, no, you would have to pay the Tiger King, because he probably paid that guy, you know, a couple $100, and then now he owns the rights.
He owns the